Well, welcome everyone. It's a rainy night here in London, but wherever you are, maybe it's slightly nicer. I was just saying earlier, I was walking around and went to the shop, my local shop, who are normally very chirpy, and said, "How are you today?" And they kind of went, "Okay." So anyway, we're here to lift the energy. So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have two wonderful guests tonight who you may or may not know that much about. So I'll do a little brief introduction. And they both have very different, equally fascinating ways of journeying through cities and landscapes. We have Morag Rose, who is an anarcho-flaneuse. I love that term. And a walking artist, activist, and academic. And since 2006, she has been leading the Loiterers Resistance Movement in Manchester. And the LRM manifesto says, "Our city is wonderful and made for more than shopping. The streets belong to everyone," hence the title of this evening's event. "And we want to reclaim them for play and revolutionary fun." I think that's a motto that most of us can probably live by here. From CCTV bingo, and we're going to ask you a bit more about that later, to human fox hunts and giant vegan cake maps, Morag's walks uncover hidden stories, celebrate public space, and prove that the city is a place for curiosity and a little mischief. And joining her is Polly Atkin, poet, nonfiction writer, chronicler of nature and human experience. Polly grew up in Nottingham, lived for a while in East London, and now calls the Lake District her home. She co-owns the historic, and correct me if I pronounce this incorrectly, Grasmere Bookshop, which is called the Sam Reed Bookseller. She published acclaimed poetry collections like Basic Nest Architecture and Much with Body, as well as compelling nonfiction, including Recovering Dorothy and Some of Us Just Fall, exploring nature, disability, and the surprising ways in which life, I guess, changes us as we move through it. And as an extra treat for you at the end of today, we will, contrary to Andrew's normal quiz, Andrew loves a quiz, but in a more kind of inclusive and non-competitive vibe, which Morag has asked, we're going to have a lottery. So if you're interested in winning one of two ebooks of The Feminist Art of Walking, and yes, there we go. I'm just trying to make it appear behind my virtual screen. There you go. And if you haven't read it, as Molly will know, a famous Australian music presenter once says, "Do yourself a favor, get a copy." Maybe you can get a copy tonight. So just pop your name in the chat if you want to be part of the lottery, because you might already have a copy, or even if you do, you might want to give it to someone. So, and then I'll write your name on some lottery tickets and we'll have a little lottery draw. So, okay, without further ado, I'll just let Molly and Morag begin the conversation. And if you have questions, you can always put those in the chat as well, but we will have an open section at the end where you can ask a question directly. Okay.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie, and welcome everybody. It is so amazing to see so many people coming in from all around the world. It's fantastic. My name's Polly Atkin. My pronouns are she, her. And I'm going to be asking Morag some questions today about her wonderful book, The Feminist Art of Walking, which is such a joyful and galvanizing read. I really enjoyed going back into it to think about what I wanted to ask, which there are so many things that I wanted to ask. So we'll see how far we get through those questions. We're going to, or rather, I'm going to ask Maura questions until about 1:45, and then we'll open up the questions to you. So do put questions in the chat, or put them in the chat. We'll see if we can wave if they're not being noticed as well, but we'll keep an eye on those for you. And be thinking of those questions as we go through as well. As Anne-Marie said, there are so many exciting different elements of this book and of Morag's work that you might want to pick out as we go through and you might want to ask more about. But I'm going to start with the beginning, Morag. Can you tell us a bit about why you wrote the book and how it came into being?
Yeah, thank you. And just to echo what Polly said, thank you so much for just spending your time here. Really appreciate it. It's so nice to see people from across the globe. So why did I write it? I guess in one way it was an absolute urge because I knew if I never did it now, it wouldn't happen. And it had been floating around in little bits of it floating around in notebooks and post-it notes for about 20 years on and off, really. And I suddenly realised, if not now, really. And what my motivation was probably about 80% love and joy for what I do, and all the amazing women artists and activists that I knew were using walking in just amazingly creative and exciting ways. And maybe about kind of 20% rage and despair, partly that there were still so many barriers to inclusion in public space and walking more generally, but also because I didn't see a lot of the amazing diversity reflected in a lot of the work that was coming out. There are some brilliant exceptions, and I feel like I'm following a lot of people who've been doing that work to expand the field and to get names out there. But I really wanted the book that I wish I could have read. I think someone said it earlier, actually. I wish it had been there like 10 or 20 years ago because, and I thought, I've got to do it. So it kind of drew partly on my experiences with the LRM and partly on some research I've been involved in more recently around women's experiences of space, and also partly my personal experiences. And finally, and for me, really, really, really importantly, I wanted it to be a celebration of some of the really wonderful work that was out there, to just try and make something that was really, the joy more than the anger, but I can't deny that there was definitely some of that there, And I'm also delighted I got that to add up to 100 because it's not my strong point. As I started down the numbers there, I thought problems, but yeah.
I love that because I always think the joy often starts you off on a writing project, or starts off an idea. But I think often what actually carries us through with the writing project to the very end, because publication is a long and hard journey for most of us, especially if we aren't in the center of things, that it's spite.
Yeah.
It is just
Yeah.
spite that fuels you, refusing to be silenced, and refusing to listen when people tell you that what you're doing doesn't count.
Absolutely. And I think for me, part of that rage actually was around a lot of the stuff around psychogeography that I'd come across. It was either massively unpolitical or quite sort of neo-colonial in tone, or just very just celebrating still this. And I'm really sorry to even use this word because I tried to not use it, but kind of the flaneur just hasn't gone and they're boring. And I wanted to just get rid of that. So I was kind of partly motivated by that desire for expansion and other voices. And I remember a few years ago kind of moaning and someone saying, actually, if you don't do it, that's the best, rage is good, but only if it's an energy. I think so.
Yes.
Try to channel it into something that was celebratory and actually that doesn't dwell on that bad stuff. Apart from the introduction, I deliberately not talked about the things that make me annoyed because it was about creating space and opening doors. So I didn't want to dwell on those things.
Yeah, I think that's so important. My cat has just flaneured in and is complaining loudly. I don't know whether it's a literary criticism or something else. But I apologize if you can. Zoom is probably cutting him out, but you might be able to hear some terrible wailing in the background. So that leads me on really nicely to my next question, which was about how this book really very much deliberately places its radical roots up front. So it's part manifesto as much as a record of all this different artistic practice. but it's deliberately setting out to recenter voices and experiences that are often shut out or discounted in walking practice and walking art. And I wondered where that began for you. So you say it's there's 20 years of history around that. So how did that begin, and why did it become so important? And I wonder, in light of that thinking, how does the dial not shift on these conversations when all this amazing practice is going on? That what we still get published is such a centrist version of what's actually happening in practice, or such a limited version. How did that get more and more urgent as time went by as well for you?
Oh yeah, no, I think that's really true, and I also really appreciate. Thank you for kind of noticing the manifesto element, because there's times when I worry that is this too fluffy? Is it not? Is the politics not radical and clear enough? And I do wish that it was called an intersectional feminist art of walking, because I realised one of the things I learned as I was travelling around is that many people will have had to check in with me that I am, inclusive in what I'm doing, and that I am, inclusive of trans and non-binary folk, and absolutely too. I just think that it felt like, so it came out of initially, the LRM came out of a kind of radical anarchist social centre about, it was around about 20 years ago, and that was explicitly a political space, but also a place for experimentation and exchange and cross-pollination of ideas. So there wasn't a singular view there. I think there was a lot of different perspectives, and that kind of gave me a chance to talk to people and kind of read stuff and play with art as somebody that didn't come from that background. So that was when I guess I first became interested in the situationist, and the idea of psychogeography came up a few times. And so we kind of started then. And I guess I was very idealistic at that point, and I think I still am in lots of ways. I do think that it's better to do something than nothing. And Manchester at that time was really having a kind of rapid expansion of, I'll call it what it is, like gentrification and kind of neoliberal enclosure of closing down. And I was really very concerned about what was happening on the street. Parallel to my kind of activisty stuff there, I was a community development worker, working across Greater Manchester. So often dealing with communities who were at the kind of sharp end. It wasn't called austerity then, but obviously there was still, there were a lot of things going on and a lot of people doing a lot of great work. And I suppose I also wanted to think through the street as a place of conviviality and walking with difference, and also for a bit of respite, right? Because anyone doing any kind of social justice work, it is tiring and exhausting, and finding time for conversations and exploration can be difficult. So that was the kind of foundations. It was absolutely rooted in those ideas, and it isn't always as apparent now if you come for a walk. Often people come for all kinds of reasons, so it is maybe a little bit more gentle in some senses, but actually that profound idea that we use space because if we don't use it, we will lose it, and because fundamentally we own it, we have a stake in it, and by being in public and kind of making connections with other people and with each other and with the places that we're in and asking questions, to me, those are all really fundamental rights that we maybe don't realize until they're gone. And the main, I guess, one of the changes in my thinking is realizing over this, becoming more and more aware of the privilege I have to be able to do that in lots of ways as a white woman. And as I've got older, I've noticed actually I can get away with more things because of the weird way that you become slightly invisible actually as a middle-aged woman. So it's kind of been interesting that I've always been attentive to who's not there. I guess I've become even more attentive to that, because I think that what's happened over the last few years, we're regressing again. Things are getting worse. Like, we didn't stop gentrification in Manchester, like, no spoilers or anything, but we didn't. But there's something about playing out and having another alternative that at least we have stories and questions, and that is not nothing. It's another layer. But it feels like, for all kinds of reasons, people are becoming more and more excluded from places on all kinds of grounds. So in that way, it feels more urgent. And I've kind of said this elsewhere. But I think that keeping space open is the opposite to putting down flags. and bullying people out. And I see that happening more and more. And there are lots of things we need to do to counteract that. And I don't think just playing out is enough, but it's not nothing. And using our bodies when we can and how we can always felt really important to me. So yeah, that occupation and that opening, I think, is at the heart of it.
That's such a wonderful way of putting it, and that tension that we all have, I think, when you're thinking, um, what is what I am doing, what is it achieving, is that I think often we get focused on the fact that it's not everything, when, as you say, it's not nothing. Anne Maria's just put in the chat a reminder: this session is being recorded. So if you don't want to be recorded, do turn your camera off. Yeah. Um, yeah, all of those points so important, and I think also that feeling that even since the book came out, it feels like some of those issues are becoming increasingly urgent again, and that openness, but also the joy in openness, because I think that's what really strikes me about both your personal practice and the work with the Loiterers Resistance Movement. I dropped a link to the Loiterers Resistance Movement in the chat as well, so you can see that, the LRM. That work and everything about this book and the way you write about it, as you say, it was born from rage, but there's so much joy and so much playfulness in there as well, that I think that's what I really noticed when I returned to it as a text, having read it before it came out, is that it feels like such a positive call for action. And I really love that element of it, which seems like a large part of your work as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I am incorrigibly optimistic on the whole, and I'm proud of that. I don't think we should see that as a bad thing. I feel like maybe there is something gendered here about this. I remember when I stopped. I sort of left my community work job around about 10ish years ago to do a PhD. And because I was getting, again, actually slightly angry, I was getting really cross about austerity, and I wanted evidence to prove what I used to be could fight better fights. And nobody needs a slightly disillusioned community worker when people come with good ideas, because what that job is about enabling and facilitating and skill building. It's not about, good work like that's invisible. But anyway, yeah, and I remember a couple of times somebody said to me at a conference that I was far too passionate and happy and colourful to ever be an academic. And yeah, exactly. And I realised that was totally gendered, because those words, kind of like feisty, which is my least favourite word in the language, because it's only ever weaponized. And actually, and lots of people, so I feel like I'm drawing a lot here on Black feminism and writers like Bell Hooks, who talk about, joy and love as creative and generative and really powerful forces. And I do think that resistance can be joy. And for me, it is, I guess, always about connection in some way, because without that, what really is going to get us through. So I think that there's definitely joy. And for me, what I love about what I do and why I think I have absolutely the best job in the world is a lot of the time I just get to wander around, kind of having conversations with people or paying attention and finding delightful things. And I still can't quite believe that I've got away with it for so long and carry on doing it. And if I can pass that, and it's funny because one of the things I say a lot is that everywhere's interesting, and maybe part of it comes from the fact that my body means I walk slowly, and that means that I pay attention to textures or things, and I didn't consciously make that a virtue. So I think there are complicated things at work, but I think there's so much benefit to paying attention. And when people say, oh, you should know your place, to me that's a great thing. And the trick is always to be open to who or what's around the next corner, and to not forget that even though you are very specifically where you are, there are those much wider solidarities and connections as well. I think I draw quite a lot on Doreen Massey and the idea that the local and the global are not in opposition, and we can have a very progressive and open joy in where we are and still remain connected and attentive. I think that's really where I come from. That was
That's
a
lo-
lot.
no, but that's perfect, because actually you got to leading me really nicely on to my next question, which was about locality and uh, locale and local, if you like, because the book is structured around different places as it goes through, which I really loved as well. Some of the places that I know relatively well, and some of them I don't really know very well at all. And I wondered if you could tell us a bit about that structure, how you ended up at that structure, um, and why those particular places, why those places mattered and formed the structure.
Yeah, I mean, I have to be honest and say, structuring the book for a while was for me the biggest challenge because I am not, as anyone that's ever met me will tell you, structure is not my natural strength. You know, I like the derive and the wobbly journey, but I think for me, it's important that if we're thinking about walking, it is always absolutely embodied and not an abstract thing. It's a doing thing and it's an in place
Mm.
thing always. And like I said, I think that everywhere is interesting. And part of that idea about kind of diversifying and opening up was to think through some of the places that we might not always read about. So I guess the easy thing for me to have done would have been to write a book all about Manchester. And I do absolutely love Manchester, but not uncritically. A lot of my, I spent a long time trying to make it better and maybe not always um succeeding, but I didn't actually want to write a Manchester book. Partly because as a city, I think it's got this weird exceptionalism and it doesn't really need enough about it. But actually, mainly because I've never wanted my walks to be didactic and telling people how to walk this way. I want to maybe share some thoughts or some tools that you can use however you like. And I really wanted to draw in some of the places that really mattered to me, partly because, again, psychogeography has historically been linked to big cities like London and Paris, maybe. And I should have said when I started out, I hadn't read any of the literature either, which is probably how I carried on for so long without reading any of it. But I guess I wanted to think about things are everywhere, and so I chose places that mattered to me. And I think initially I wasn't sure how much of me and my story would be in it, rather than me as as the LRM or within that work. But again, thinking through the embodied stuff, I realised it became increasingly important that I did want to put myself in there, because if I'm thinking about women in my life, some of them were really personal, and as a disabled person, that's always been really pivotal to my practice. And I reached a point that I talk about the personal as political, so to not honour those places and those people felt like I was not writing an honest book, because I wanted to write a book that would be read and that wasn't a textbook and that was something. And I realised that I had stuff to say that was the best way to do it. So the places that I chose were all really important to me. And I guess I have varying levels of connection. So I'm going to see if I can remember them all. That's going to be really embarrassing. So like Manchester, obviously, is kind of where it all began. And it finishes actually in Salford. So I crossed the River Irwell about 3 years ago now, and it's funny how you know someone and you don't until you're actually there. But anyway, that for me was really important. It probably is the anchor, and I think you can see that Manchester does bleed into the other places as well, because I'm not that interested in the official boundaries. And then Eastbourne was really important. That's where I grew up, and I think it's a much maligned place, and I do think it's fascinating. I enjoy visiting there in a way that I maybe didn't appreciate as a child, and certainly not as a teenager, when all I wanted to do was go to Brighton and get served and go dancing or whatever. So there's a bit of a reclamation there, but also a kind of shattering of some of the stereotypes, like living on an estate kind of on the edge of town. And it was lovely. Do you know what I mean? It's not, I did not live in a ghetto, and people were really supportive, and there was lots of things there. And I guess I wanted to go, but that's not what you think of. If anyone thinks of Eastbourne, it's probably not that. It's usually the kind of posh people or retirement homes. So that was there. Ebervale is there, which was challenging because I have very little connection to it in lots of ways, but it's where my mum was born and thinking about hereditary stuff. And I wanted to include a place I didn't know so well. Sheffield, because it's where I did my PhD, and I really love Sheffield actually. Liverpool, because it's where I work now. That felt really important to kind of connect where I am. And there's a chapter which has Glossop and Stockport and Ashton all in together, and I've done them all a bit dirty, to be honest, because they could all deserve chapters of their own, but there was word constraints, which I feel like also really need to apologise to Glasgow, because there was a Glasgow chapter, and it's probably the most obvious. Well, it's not obvious to anyone else, but to me, the place missing is Glasgow, because I really wanted to write that, and maybe Leeds a bit as well, but that wasn't there for more personal reasons, because I realised that was a bit too messy. And I think there's always that ethics of care. When I decided I was going to include bits about me, I wanted to be really mindful. So the motto of the LRM, and I guess it's my motto for life now, really, is that whatever you're doing, you take care of yourself and each other and of the places you work through, and don't be an arse. And I felt like the Leeds chapter, not only was I being an arse, it was hurting other people. So
That's
yeah.
really interesting. That's so interesting. I'd love to know more about that. As someone who spent I worked for 3 years in Glasgow, and I spent a lot of time walking around Glasgow in extreme pain, because it was also just around the time of my diagnoses and the beginning of my treatment for hemochromatosis as well. And yeah, so Glasgow walking in pain, and like completely like mushed up in my head.
Wow.
So one day we'll have to talk about that more. I wondered if this would be a good place to read a little bit as well, because I wondered if you wanted to read a bit from that the chapter which has Stockport, Ashton Underline, and Glossop
Yeah.
because there's some wonderful. One of the things I really love about the book as well is that you include some of these communal poems and also self-reflective pieces that you write as part of it too. So I wondered if you could give us a bit of a flavour of that.
Yeah, thank you. And can I just say, it's such a beautiful gift to hear about the book from other people's eyes. So I appreciate you asking for this bit, because don't think I've read it out loud before actually. So thank you. So yeah, mischievously, we began at a no loitering sign painted on a wall of Oxford Road. When we sat down to draw our maps later, they were full of bossy directives and diversions. So we'd been on a walk looking at prohibition signs. Footpath closed. Park gates will be locked at dusk. Diversion in place. Caution. Arrows pointing pedestrians in seemingly conflicted directions. CCTV is in operation for your safety. We also created a communal poem after December 2023's first Sunday. It shares what we found on a drift guided by Phil Smith's book, The Silver Snake Project, and I'm sure many Waters and folk people will know Phil. A meeting point had been the glacial erratic in Ardwick Green, which is, I think, one of the most significant points in Manchester. So here's what we wrote together then. A December Derive. We became a river, whirled together, trapped by metal, funneled by traffic, moving forces beyond us, cut off from our life spring, crossing roads as impossible as parting the sea, and, and, and yet we drifted as one, followed the signs, supple, tender, shifting, marine life washed ashore, meandering, maritime beyond time, invisible waters leaping through, dolphins surviving despite decay, riversides with no river, desecrated medlock, tentacular forms prep pace, ghost kitchens, dark brews, lovecraft, love, craft, shipwrecks, lucky beds, sacred groves, treasure troves, labyrinths, demon dogs, glass fish for drunken sailors. You couldn't make this up. Together, we knew without knowing. Tides guided us home. A toast to terra, to aqua, to stranded mermaids. Wailing foghorns, celestial lighthouses. Flotsam and jetsam rising again. Cloud water bubbles, cliff edge crumbles. 2 hearts, 8 legs, multitudes, no borders, no cares, a black star on a red button, something to cling to as we float on by.
Thank you so much. It was so lovely to hear that. And I really love all these different kinds of texts that this book contains as well as all these different kinds of reflection as well, from the memoir elements to the social and political history, all the lives of other people that are in this book as well as all the different ways of making art and all these different responses to place, which hopefully we'll come back to a bit. I'm just going to give a kind of 10-minute warning for you to be thinking about your questions. So do think about questions as we go along. And I'm going to ask another one now. So you talked about disability and your own experience of chronic illness and those kind of limitations and what it does to your walking experience as well, which really chimes with me as well, that enforced slowness as showing you different things about place. I find it's not what you choose, but it becomes a different kind of practice. And for me, this is one of the things that's most radical about this book, because there's very little walking literature that includes disabled experience at all. And along with all the other kinds of intersectionalities you talk about, it's just so important and also so refreshing. So one of my favorite chapters is Walking On Together, which is quite late on, where you talk about the different barriers to walking practice that you've seen, from cultural to physical ones, and looking at different kinds of inaccessibility and different kinds of access to argue for what you call a more holistic and intersectional definition of access. So could you talk us through what you mean by this more holistic definition of access, and how that's come out of your own practice as well?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's something I've been thinking through a long time, and it's still ongoing, really. One of the things I've loved about the book is I've had a few conversations about, what else we can learn, because to me, I feel like with my academic head on, I sometimes feel like we're not supposed to say we're still learning, but I absolutely am. I absolutely know my gaps here, and I think a lot in Venn diagrams somehow. That fits my brain, Venn diagrams and mind maps, and I think that I wanted to make clear that there are lots of reasons why people don't do something or can't feel at home or like they belong in a place, and we need to treat them all kind of not in isolation, because that just increases the boxes. And so I guess when I was thinking about material barriers, in some ways some of those are obvious, because it's, if there's stairs without railings, then I turn into a Dalek and I'm just not going to do it. And I talk quite a lot about public toilets, and actually my students will laugh at me, because in a way it's an easy way in, and it feels even more important now to say that actually everybody deserves safe and accessible toilet facilities, and we shouldn't be using them as a way to police gender either. But for what it's worth, disabled toilets have always been gender neutral, and there's never been enough of them. And most of them aren't actually properly accessible either. But anyway, that's the side rant. But yeah, so there is material stuff that's really important, but it isn't just the obvious. And I know that I don't know everything that's needed there, but we need to build things in from the beginning. So when you're designing a space, you're not just adding on. You're not doing that thing that's well documented now, that built for an average body that doesn't really exist. That you're talking to lots of different types of disabled people, because we're all different. There is no one shared experience there, or people with children or whatever. So we think about that, and we think about that accessible environment as something that's useful to everyone. So if we've got a shallow ramp instead of some stairs, it's not just good for wheelchair users or disabled people, but somebody who's broken their leg or has a pushchair or a buggy or a suitcase, or is just feeling sleepy. So it's building those things in, but that wouldn't be enough, because we need to think about those cultural barriers. And for me, the ones that I write about in the book are often on gender as the primary reason that people experience harassment or fear based on their gender. but it's always intersectional. Nobody's just one thing. And so, you know, the experience of Black women, for example, or trans women is, you know, multiplied by that intersectionality. And I guess I get really cross at the kind of tabloid idea that intersectionality is hard, because actually all it says is we're all lots of different things at the same time. And some of those are relationships of power relative to others, and some of them are subject to stereotypes and, you know, various harms. So I think I wanted to put that really foregrounding, that we think about that, and we also make a space where people can share their access needs, or we do our best and we're sometimes honest that we can't do everything. So the social centre that we came out of, I am still horrified about this, but when we took it on, it was called Basement, and it was, as you might expect, underground. And we fundraised for a lift, and we built a really lovely accessible toilet that really was genuinely accessible. But we never got the lift put in because none of us understood planning law or consent. And so we had a, you know, radical, accessible centre that was downstairs, which was clearly not okay. And that taught me a lot about sometimes just being honest and, you know, learning from your mistakes and owning them, because I think we are not perfect, but I think that it is always about respect. And now I would not dream of being involved in a space that was like that. But I realised that it was important to start telling people things like that, because otherwise they think you're some, you know, perfect being, and it isn't true. So I really want to try and have a place where we automatically kind of try and build in these things, or at least know what we don't know and acknowledge that, and think about who isn't here, or who should I try and learn from without putting the burden on them. Like, say, you know, you're not always expecting people to tell you about their expression, but you're reading what's out there, because there's a lot of great stuff out there, and there's a lot of, for example, design standards or kind of experts in different fields that could, you know, that can help. So yeah, I think that's, for me, what I was talking about. And I know that we're a long way from it, but I feel like if sometimes we can create just temporarily a space that opens it up, then it's somehow kind of modeling and showing that it is possible. So I think that's what I'm coming from. But yeah, there's a lot of work. The other thing I haven't spoken about there is the kind of ownership and legality. So I'm really interested in what right to roam means in a city when we've got increasingly privatized spaces, and how we can try and push back against those constant enclosures. And I suppose that's something that we try and do we kind of talk about creative mischief quite a lot. So we are kind of poking fun and pushing those borders, but also, again, from that place of, it's always been very clear on a first Sunday that we know that not everyone can get arrested for all kinds of reasons, whether it's immigration status or parenting responsibilities or whatever. And so it's always very soft and very kind of creative mischief, and very happy to, you know, support direct action and other methods that we need. But actually, sometimes there's a place for kind of culture, and it's lovely to be in a room full of artists or people interested in art. I don't feel I need to explain that sometimes there's this wonderful epiphany when you have a conversation or you experience something, and that can keep you warm through some of the difficult times, you know.
That's also so important. And yeah, that combination of thinking about access in terms of accessibility and access in terms of um, ownership, land ownership, is comes through and is enfolded so well in the book as well. And I love the centering of loitering, especially in light of the increasing monetization of space. Not just it's kind of being shut away, but the fact that some spaces might be open, but you might have to pay to use them as well. And that sense that being in public is increasingly politicized again, for particularly for certain groups of people, and that kind of sense of reclaiming that. We're now about almost hitting quarter two, so we're going to come to some questions from you in a bit. I'm just going to ask one more first, because I particularly love how you take this often solitary idea of walking art and flip it in this book and in your practice to think about interconnectedness and community, while still maintaining that place for the individual and the individual embodied and historied connection and experience within that. So one of my favorite bits is where you say this space is ours, it belongs to everyone, and we're all connected. So how did you get to pulling these things together, these kind of aspects of memoir with this collective thinking? And what do you think the collective thinking offers that you can't do as an individual as well?
I think that it's something I slightly struggle with actually sometimes, because I also think sometimes I may be claiming something from the collective that not everyone agrees with. Actually, and I think that's quite important to say. So that poem I read, the fan poem, there'll be people on that walk who'll be going, I didn't write that bit. What's she talking about? And that's okay. So I think for me, when I'm sorry to talk about the flaneur again, but for me, the dangerous thing about them isn't that they were male or privileged or able-bodied or rich or all these things, because to some extent that's not their fault. They could be an ally too, but for me the problem is that that myth of being able to move untouched and untouching of space, and I think that is really dangerous and atomizing and quite Thatcherite and neoliberal, and we are alienated, and I guess that's one of the things that I really tried to do on a first Sunday, to keep it open for anyone that wants to. And I do know that I probably didn't appreciate the social aspects. It sounds really silly thinking about it now, but probably not until lockdown, actually. I don't think I'd realised how many friends like the people I like to be in touch with, that I suddenly realised that, oh, this has become a hub. And I didn't always appreciate it. It's a cliche thing, you don't really know until it's gone. But for me, at the heart of loitering as well is just being able to just be and to do as you like, and to just do that in company feels for me really important. And I feel slightly sure I see this on a screen, but I feel like this, I hear quite a lot about the kind of epidemics of loneliness or alienation or whatever, and for me, just trying to make connections and reach out is really important and is really valuable. And I guess that's not what I set out to do, but I'm really glad. And I think the thing about privatization of space, I'm really proud that everything that LRM does is free. So we came from a very kind of DIY punk attitude of let's just do this thing. I said I hadn't really read any of the theory or whatever, and it was just let's do it. And one of the brilliant things I think about walking, and I should have said this really early on if anyone doesn't know, when I talk about walking, it includes wheelchairs and assisted and also however you walk. Theoretically, it's there and it's free, right? And you don't need to go to art school, or you don't need to feel like. For me, there's a brilliant thing, especially as galleries are really, I've had times in life when I've not felt like they were for me, but actually the street is for everyone, or it absolutely should be. So there's something there about, again, I feel like I said this a lot today, opening up. It's obviously in my brain, but I just think that in itself quite powerful. And it's funny, like when you're writing, I don't know that process. Some bits of writing were an absolute slog. Like I know I need to write this paragraph about this thing, and every bit in me is itching. But I was thinking the conclusion just wasn't quite working. And I was rereading the beginning. There's a bit where I talk about why I loiter, and it suddenly occurred to me that it isn't me. These are all other things, and I need to. I do learn from others, and I think it's partly also related to crick theory and other stuff, where I know that I need support, and I know that support comes from all kinds of things. It's not just people, it's things like the NHS, it's libraries, it's education systems, it's all these things that we can't take for granted, because actually certain elements now would like to erode them, because we look at, again, I think it's like coming backwards, and it felt really important to really foreground that and say, actually, we are, we are part of something. And to go back to Doreen Massey again, I feel like I slightly misquote her. We're all constellations. We're not lone stars, and that I think is really, really important. And somehow is what I've learned. And writing the book really reassured that to me. And I think when I was putting things together, there was a time when my my office wall, or rather my partner's office wall, because I didn't have a desk at the time, looked like the stereotypical kind of serial killers lair, which I think is ironic given how much I hate that kind of like women as victims. But I felt like I was accidentally reclaiming that trope as well by having a lot of things with string and lines and stuff connecting them together.
Wonderful. Does anybody have a question? Oh, I've just seen one is arrived in the chat, just as I was about to say. Marieka has a question. Early on in the interview, you mentioned your reservations about psychogeography. You may explain these in the book, but as I haven't read it yet, could you please expand a bit on what I take to be your ambiguous feelings about the movement? Ambiguous because I understand you to be a fan of the very idea of the derive. And as a follow-up, do you believe intersectional feminist geography is thinkable? Yeah.
Yeah. For the second bit, yes, I absolutely think it's thinkable. I guess for me, so the LRM, the Loiterers Resistance Movement, set ourselves up really early on as explicitly engaging with psychogeography, but we didn't have psychogeography in our name for various reasons, and one of those actually was the sense that it would put people off because it's an ology, and some of the writing is very for something that talks about the revolution of everyday life, a lot of the writing can be quite boring and quite dense and quite tricky, and didn't want to put people off. And I guess we were also actually going on the tradition of organisations like Manchester Area Psychogeography that have the three letter acronym in their name. What I didn't really know at the time was I think I mentioned, I think sometimes there's a bit of almost a colonial edge to some psychogeography, that there's this idea to be claiming space, or penetrating space, or going, oh look what we've discovered, and it ignores the people and the non-human people and the stuff that was already there, all those layers, and it kind of claims it and makes out like there's some secret occult thing that if only you do it properly, you'll find this. And I guess I would say bollocks to that in a really inappropriate language use, but it actually isn't that. Again, it was like, actually we can all have these connections and they're all slightly different, and that's fine. There isn't one person doing it, and a lot of it has tended towards the blowfish. And I think it's Lauren Elkin in the Funnies that talks about the penis being as a necessary appendage, like a walking cane, and it felt like that. I didn't know at the time. And actually, funny enough, one of the reasons I began to realise it was when people assumed that I was a man. When I used the LRM, so I've always been involved from the start, and I was one of the founders, and for a very long time, essentially, it's sort of me and whoever turns up in lots of ways. And I used the name because I wanted to adopt that it's a collective. And I also felt maybe a bit nervous at that time of, sticking my head above the parapet and doing a thing in case it didn't work or no one was interested. And actually, that as a woman, there was places that would be scared to go on my own, and it just felt for lots of reasons. But it meant that people assumed I was a man. So I started putting my name on things eventually. It was like, no, I'm really angry that you've just made this assumption. So that's kind of my complicatedness. But I do still think, at heart, there is something quite beautiful in the idea of psychogeography as body, as tool, and exploration. And I do still take energy from ideas like the Society of the Spectacle and some of that situation stuff. They gave very good slogans that hit me in other ways. Like I knew some of them from music without knowing where they came from. And I guess I'm also quite stubborn in that I was like, okay, now I know this thing, I am going to keep using it. And some of the women I talked to in the book, like Sonia Oval, for example, proudly uses the word psychogeography. And I do sometimes, and I don't sometimes, it fluctuates, but I do still think there's a lot interesting. And for me, what it does do is have that political intent front and centre, even though for some psychogeography, I'd argue it's not really there. It's sort of evolved into whimsy, but for me, it shows our intent, I think.
I think that's really interesting. One of the things I always think about with psychogeography is that for me, I always come back to the fact that one of the people always talk about with psychogeography is Thomas de Quincey, who did exactly the same practice here in the Lake District that he did in the city, and yet psychogeography is always seen as an urban thing and not a rural thing. So I really wanted to reclaim it as a rural practice as well. You can have a rural psychogeography, and there should be more of that.
Well, I totally agree with that. And I think one of the other things in the book I hope was slightly dissolving that binary between
Yeah,
country and city, and people like Jane Samuels, who does just beautiful work
yeah,
on, and says that a lot of the things we're arguing about around enclosure happened first in the country. So
yeah.
yeah, I again, I think you can do it everywhere. And I grew up in on the edge of the Downs, and I'm not allergic to the countryside. I think we do need to talk more about rules. For me, it's it can be anywhere and everywhere, and for everyone and anyone.
Excellent. Now we've got another question here from Laura Garrod saying, can you elaborate a bit more on the importance of your work given the current political climate surrounding immigration and how female bodies and agency are weaponized within this?
That is such an important issue, and actually, coincidentally, I spent this afternoon thinking about work that engages directly with borders, actually, because I do think it's really central importance. And I just think that it's really, really important. And I'm struggling. I really apologize. I've had a brain fart. I've forgotten the name of the artist, but it was connected to Huntley and Devon Arts, an amazing walk from Glasgow City Centre to an immigration detention centre outside that took place in COVID. And I'm so sorry I've forgotten the artist's name. If anyone remembers it or knows it, please put it in the chat. A really amazing piece of work. And others who are exploring these things, because I do think they're amongst the most urgent. And actually, for me, as a psychogeographer or as something interested in the reading, if we think about the ultimate idea of loitering or space belonging to everyone, it really does make a mockery of borders, because we know that a line on a map is always about power and is essentially made up, and I do think that there's actually a duty for artists to kind of speak truth to power or to complicate things or ask questions when we can in whatever way we have. And absolutely, I think female bodies have always been kind of weaponized and exploited in all kinds of other ways. And I think there's something really important. Well, I put feminist in the book title to be very clear, because I wanted, again, to reclaim that word from people who are turning it into something poisonous. But for me, feminism is about care, and it's about support, and it's about lifting up and making solidarities, across and beyond gender. So I do think that there's something that we can all be doing in different ways there. I'm generally Iman Tajik. Thank you so much, Danny. I really do apologise to him for forgetting his name. I've been thinking a lot about the work at the moment and just been slightly blown away by it. Because I think making borders visible. Oh yes, Henna does amazing work as well. There is such a lot there, and actually, it's one of the other gaps in the book, because it's quite a lot relating to my experience, and it's very UK focused. I really wanted people to tell me who's missing this time, and for other people to carry on the conversation on the walk, and to do stuff around that.
In some way, there's some amazing work. Because I was thinking about that amazing photo essay as well about the Mexican American border, who again, brain fog. I can't remember the name of who it is either. I haven't looked at any of this stuff for a while. But I used to teach with that when I was teaching this kind of stuff. And there's more of that kind of work about the political power of borders with it, I think, going on in a US and Canadian context than there is in a UK context as well.
Yes, there is. I also found it interesting, the call to witness in places at the moment. It's like, it's not enough, but actually sometimes that's really important. And it's felt at times, especially thinking about the regeneration and the exclusion in that way, sometimes what we've done is witness the destruction and the loss, because it is, for example, a loss of working class stories. And keeping them and carrying them goes some way. Not enough, I want those places. And I think it's an absolute urgent time. It was another choice on the book, actually, because thinking internationally, I walked in the States quite a lot, and I have a lot of thoughts, but I just didn't have space for them, and I think it would be fantastic for those together. I'm really appreciating people's comments in the chat. But yeah, thank you.
Sorry, Morag, go on.
I was going to say that if I haven't answered the question, you just carry on the conversation, please do feel free to email me or come to a First Sunday in Manchester. I'm always really happy to talk about this stuff and stuff.
There's two more things I want to say as we draw to a close. And one of them, as Andrew has just asked in the chat, so Morag's been awarded by activist pedestrian charity Living Streets for her work. Are there other artists who are campaigners for pedestrian rights? And I think there certainly are others, but I don't know if anyone's... I'm thinking again about people like Jack Cornish, for instance, who crosses over some of those kind of rural-urban divides too. But it'd be interesting to think about other... Maybe people can drop in the chat other examples of that.
Can I be really honest and say that I kind of wish I didn't have to do the pedestrian rights stuff and the rights of way things? But it's felt like a very urgent thing that if we lose this space or it's not safe, then we can't use the space to be creative. So I would, although, you know, it was lovely to get that award, I kind of wish I hadn't had to. Because...
I totally get that. I think just wanted to close by quoting you again, coming back to that last question, that, as I said, I find it such a hopeful and galvanizing book as a manifesto and call for action. And you say in it, I believe walking in new ways can help us imagine new ways of using, being, and connecting with who and where you are. And also say it's not a recipe to save the world, but it is one tool. And I think that kind of sense that you were just talking about, that these are all tools that we can use, they're ways towards doing something, is such a hopeful and galvanizing thing in this moment in particular, probably always in every moment, but it feels like in this moment in particular, it feels like a really powerful message to take away, and a book that I hope everyone will read if they haven't already. Thank you so much, Morag.
No, and thank you for, as I said, if people have more questions, feel free. And yeah, thank you, Polly. I have to be honest and say that halfway through writing, a couple of people said, you must read this. And I was scared to read your work while I was writing. And I'm so happy I have done now. But it's like that always learning. It was absolutely amazing. It was the first thing I read when I finished writing. I had this sudden, you know, when you take stuff on. So yeah, thank you. Really amazing.
I just wanted, if you don't mind, Morag, I was just going to read just the list that you put, because I just loved, I loved all this book, but I especially loved the Eastbourne chapter, which I found very moving. I don't know, I think I like things about people's origin stories and their childhood and how they became who they were. But Morag, I presume this is a treasure hunt that you've run a number of times, or was this created for the book?
No, they were all prompts that we've used on different walks.
Right.
And I think that one in particular may have been a COVID one, I can't remember. But yes, we've also got this kind of body of tools that we call the metaphysical treasure hunt. And it's a list of around, it's expanded now, 30 or so tools that so many people added to over the years. I actually genuinely don't know who wrote which one. So,
but I just love this list of things to search for when you're out and about, and it could be in the country or the city, I suppose. Wild music, futuristic smells, star children, better times. I'll put an asterisk next to that one. Street poetry and connections. What a wonderful list.
I think if we're aiming to wrap up around the hour, we should probably,
I think
gather ourselves
I can see
in.
everyone who's still here is still wrapped, but we should probably release you into the night to eat or drink or be merry or yes. Well, that was a wonderful talk. Thank you very much, Morag, and thank you very much, Polly, for preparing all those questions. And thank you everyone for turning up. It was wonderful to see you all. And